August 1814 sees the War of 1812 heat up as battle-hardened British troops, liberated from their Napoleonic responsibilities, arrive in North America. But August also sees the beginning of peace negotiations in the Belgian city of Ghent. On August 9th, the Creek people will also sign a peace treaty with the U.S. August 3rd, the siege of Fort Erie begins with a preliminary British raid on Black Rock. Due to the significance of this prolonged battle, I plan to cover it in a separate video. Honest. Yeah, I will. I will. Honest. Stay tuned. August 4th, the Americans try to retake Fort Mackinac, which had been captured by the British on July the 18th, 1812, one of the first actions in the war. The American flotilla had arrived July the 24th, having stopped to destroy the British fort on St. Joseph's Island, as well as the trading post at Sault Ste. Marie. At first they tried to force a surrender through a naval bombardment, and when that doesn't work, spend days trying to find the right spot to land troops. So British commander Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDougall of the Glengarry Light Infantry knows they're coming and is ready for them. The Americans under Colonel George Croghan walk into an ambush with British troops in front, while Allied native warriors haunted the woods on both sides of the Yankee advance. Unable to flank the British, Croghan chooses discretion over valor and withdraws, having lost 13 dead, 48 wounded, and 2 captured. The British suffered only a few casualties. Among the U.S. dead is Major Andrew Hunter Holmes, hero of the Battle of Longwoods. The Americans sail away, but stop August 13th to raid the British supply base at the Nottawasaga River in Georgian Bay, at present-day Wasaga Beach. Attacking the 14th, they destroy a blockhouse and the Nancy, a privately owned cargo vessel in British service. And I hope they didn't poop on the beach, too. August 9th, the Royal Navy attempts to raid the village of Stonington, Connecticut, but are driven off following an artillery duel with the doughty inhabitants. The British sailing away August 13th after losing 21 killed and 50 wounded. On August the 14th, the British occupy Pensacola, that's right, Florida, to keep it out of American hands, setting up a future conflict with Andrew Jackson. But after Fort Erie, the most important thing to happen in August 1814 was the burning of Washington by the British. The campaign begins on August the 15th, when British Rear Admiral George Cockburn raids a factory on St. George's Island, Maryland. His purpose? To show Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane and Major General Robert Ross that the Americans won't fight. And the Americans don't fight, and the factory is burned without a shot fired. And Cochrane and Ross are convinced to go on the offensive, which begins at 2 a.m. on the 19th, when the British land at Benedict, Maryland. Always have trouble saying that. Maryland. Proceeding up the Patuxent River, that's another word I have trouble with, Patuxent River, they encounter no resistance. In fact, the only Americans that worry them are the Chesapeake flotilla under Commodore Joshua Barney, which they find at Pig Point near Upper Marlborough on the 22nd. Alas, the discovery blows up in their faces. Having held off the British as long as they could, Barney and his men burned their boats to keep them from British clutches. Out of 17 ships, only one failed to burn and explode. Barney's men then set out for Bladensburg, Maryland, to help defend the capital and see action 2 days later at the Battle of Bladensburg, August the 24th. The American commander at Bladensburg, Brigadier General William Winder, may not have been America's worst 1812 general, but he was certainly an unlucky one. If his name seems familiar, it's because he was one of the 2 American generals captured at Stony Creek, the other being John Chandler. Winder didn't have a lot to work with, and interference by Secretary of State James Monroe, of the Monroe Doctrine fame, doesn't help, but he makes a number of his own mistakes, such as failing to destroy the bridge over the east arm of the Potomac River, allowing the British to cross. At first, the Redcoats take serious casualties, but cross the bridge, and when they cross, the Americans, to use a Civil War term, skedaddle, leaving the door to Washington open. The only serious resistance is provided by Joshua Barney and his men, who, along with some Marines, man 2 artillery pieces along the main road to the capital and managed to hold the British back for a time until the sheer number of redcoats forced them to pull back. Barney, wounded in the thigh and suffering from blood loss, surrenders. Both General Ross and Admiral Coburn. Gosh, I'm having trouble with my voice today. Admiral Coburn will praise him for his gallantry. The British will enjoy a fine meal at the White House before putting it to the torch. Actually, if you read about the behavior and the actions of the British in the White House, it's actually quite hilarious. Probably more hilarious for a Canadian or British listener, but hey, I'm born in the United States and I find it hilariously funny too. In addition to the White House, the British will burn the President's residence, the Treasury, and the War Office, the Washington Navy Yard having already been burned by the Americans, but a heavy late-night rainstorm will limit the damage from the flames. Prior to the attack, Admiral Coburn sent a note to Secretary Monroe advising him that the burning of Washington was in retaliation for the American burning of York, present-day Toronto, in 1813. The next big objective for the British is Baltimore. 2 diversionary naval forces had been sent earlier to draw troops away from Washington. The first, a naval force on the Potomac under Captain James Gordon, destroys Fort Washington near Mount Vernon on August the 27th. It was actually blown up by the defenders, and on the 29th accepts the surrender of Alexandria, Virginia, whose residents would rather switch than fight, even though the surrender terms are pretty harsh. When Gordon leaves on September 2nd, he takes away 21 prize vessels filled with goods such as flour, cotton, and tobacco. But on the 31st, the 2nd Naval Force to the Upper Chesapeake, under Captain Peter Parker, not to be confused with Spider-Man, encounters unexpectedly heavy resistance when attacking Yankee militia at Cox Field, Maryland. Parker is wounded in the leg and dies, causing the British to withdraw. Thus, the busy month of August 1814 sees the beginning of the Battle of Fort Erie, the burning of Washington, the British failing to take Stonington, and the Americans failing to retake Fort Mackinac. But one more thing. On August the 30th, along the Thames River in Upper Canada, today's Ontario, American raiders, led by Andrew Westbrook, a U.S. sympathizer, were returning from an attack on Oxford, today's Oxford Centre, with 3 hostages, captains of the Oxford militia. At Hungerford Hill, near Delaware, the Americans are ambushed by Norfolk militia and retreat in confusion, having suffered 4 injured. Unfortunately, one of the captive captains, Captain John Carroll, is wounded and later dies, while Westbrook leads the rest of the raiders to safety in the USA. And that's enough for this month. Stay tuned for my upcoming video on the Battle of Fort Erie. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812, which should be obvious. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also try to review a book on the war. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. When the barrage lifts, cheers. Music used in today's video is the stirring Crusade by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. And I must apologize for my voice and all the mispronunciations, but the old windpipes, they ain't what they used to be.